Ever been to a town where, like, everybody knows everybody else? You know, one of those places where the biggest drama is, like, who's bringing what to the potluck?
Oh, yeah.
But then, picture this. That same town gets hit with a brutal triple murder.
Wow.
That's exactly what went down in 1966 in Lake Summit, North Carolina. And today, we're diving deep into this case that, well, it just ripped through this peaceful town and left a mystery that still has people talking.
You know, what always gets me about this case is the timing. It was the
Oh,
1960s.
right, a time of major change.
Exactly. You had the civil rights movement, you had all this cultural upheaval, like the whole country was in this like whirlwind of change.
And I guess in Lake Summit, that whirlwind took a dark turn with this awful discovery they made by the lake.
3 bodies.
3 bodies, and they were arranged, get this, in a semicircle.
And each one had something placed on them.
Yeah, a strange object, like almost like he was out of a detective novel.
Yeah, exactly.
But for the folks in Lake Summit, this was all too real.
Absolutely real and tragic. The victims, there was Vernon Shipman and Charles Glass.
They own that record store, right?
Yeah, a popular spot in town. And then there was Louise Shoemate, who worked at a factory.
She was kind of a private person, from what I understand.
Kept herself, yeah. And the fact that there wasn't any obvious link between Louise and the couple, that's what really threw a wrench in the investigation.
Plus, this is 1966. We're talking way before DNA testing and all those high-tech forensics they have nowadays.
Oh, yeah, they were basically working with their hands tied. No DNA, so they relied on fingerprints, eyewitness accounts, and just, good old-fashioned detective work. Think about it.
Like trying to solve a puzzle with, like, half the pieces missing.
Exactly. A very, very tough situation for investigators.
And if that wasn't enough, there were some issues with how the police handled things early on.
Yeah, it was the 60s, and societal biases definitely played a role.
Especially because Vernon and Charles were, well,
A gay couple.
yeah. And their relationship wasn't taken as seriously as, say, a heterosexual couples would have been back then. And that led to some crucial delays and missed opportunities in the investigation.
It's a good reminder, how far we've come in recognizing and respecting different lifestyles, but also how much further we still need to go.
Totally. Ensuring justice for everyone, no matter who they are or who they love.
Absolutely. Because prejudice can, well, it can cloud judgment and lead to missing key details that might help solve a case.
Right. So with the limited tools they had and the initial response not being the best, investigators were kind of stuck. And that's when the theories started swirling around.
Oh, yeah. Some folks were talking about voodoo rituals. Others thought it was a hate crime.
I even heard there was talk about it being connected to the integration efforts happening in the town at the time.
Right. It was a time of so much change. People were grasping for answers.
And then there was that whole incident with the cross burning near the crime scene.
Right, right. The authorities brushed it off as a prank.
But you have to wonder if there was more to it.
Yeah, even if it wasn't directly connected, it does highlight the racial tensions in the South back then.
It's all about context, right?
Exactly. Context is key to understanding any event, especially a historical one.
Then you had this guy, Paul Saxman, who had some beef with Vernon over, like, unpaid mortgage stuff.
And there was that bloodstained frog gigging pole they found on his property.
Makes you think, huh?
Sure does. But we have to remember, just because someone has a motive or opportunity doesn't automatically make them guilty.
And in this case, the blood on that pole couldn't be definitively tied to any of the victims.
So Saxman was a person of interest for sure, but he was never charged.
And just when it seemed like the case had gone cold, boom, a big twist pops up.
Edward Thompson Jr.
Yep, arrested for a string of violent crimes that were, well, they were eerily similar to the Lake Summit murders. Kidnappings, assaults, even murder.
And Thompson's MO, it was almost identical in some ways, forcing victims to drive him around, leaving these, odd objects on the bodies.
Just like with Vernon, Charles, and Louise.
Right. And he even reportedly confessed to killing 3 people.
So could this Thompson guy be the answer everyone was looking for?
Well, there's a big snag in that theory. Thompson was black, but the last person seen with Vernon and Charles, according to multiple witnesses, was white.
Ah, so the eyewitness accounts don't match up.
Nope, they don't. It throws a big wrench into the idea that Thompson was the one.
It's like a classic example of conflicting evidence.
Hmm.
Similarities and a confession, but then you have those eyewitness accounts that just don't fit.
Makes you wonder, right? Were the authorities maybe so desperate to close the case that they tried to make Thompson fit the narrative?
We've seen that happen before, haven't we?
Oh, yeah. The pressure to solve a high-profile case can lead to, well, mistakes.
It feels like time. And those early missteps in the investigation have kind of created this wall of mystery around the case.
It's possible we may never know the full truth.
And that's a tough pill to swallow, especially for Vernon, Charles, and Louise, who deserve justice.
It's a tragedy for sure. It is a shame, you know? But even with these kinds of roadblocks, there's always a sliver of hope in cases like this.
Yeah, I was just thinking, what if somewhere in all those old files there's a tiny detail that everyone missed back then? Something that could just blow this whole thing wide open.
You know, that's what makes cold cases so fascinating. There's always that chance. Maybe a new way of looking at things, or some new tech could uncover the missing pieces.
Like what?
Well, remember that frog gigging pole we talked about?
The one with the blood stains?
That's the one, found on that property owned by Saxman.
Right, right.
Back in '66, blood analysis was pretty basic. They could say, yep, that's human blood, but that was about it. But these days, oh, we can do so much more. We could maybe even get DNA from that blood, compare it to databases, or even living relatives.
Wow, you're saying even though this case is decades old, new forensic tech, like DNA analysis, could still bring justice?
Absolutely, and it's not all about the tech either. There are folks out there, like that journalist you mentioned, Jenny Jones-Giles. They dedicate years digging through records, talking to people, trying to piece together those broken stories. They just want the truth.
It's amazing the level of dedication they have. They never give up hope.
And that leads us to another case, one that takes us from North Carolina to Victorian England.
Oh, okay, what do we have here?
This one's a mix of true crime and royal intrigue. We're going to talk about a teenager who became one of the first, you could say, celebrity stalkers. And his target was none other than Queen Victoria.
Hold on, are we talking about the Queen Victoria, the one who ruled forever and, like, defined an era? What could a teenager possibly do to get on her radar?
Well, picture this. It's 1838. London's covered in its usual fog. Gas lamps are casting shadows on the streets. And inside Buckingham Palace, things are about to get weird.
All right, you've got my attention. I can practically hear those carriages rattling down the street. Tell me more.
Okay, so it's the middle of the night, and this palace porter, William Cox, he's just finishing up his shift. Sitting by the fire, enjoying the quiet, when suddenly a door flies open. This shadowy figure slips into the room.
Okay, wait. A shadowy figure in Buckingham Palace in the middle of the night. That's already giving me goosebumps.
Yeah.
What did this figure look like?
Cox described him as short and really shiny, almost oily. He could barely make out any features in the dim light, but he saw this wide, toothy grin and these piercing white eyes. They seemed to look right through him.
Whoa, that's freaky. Did Cox go after the intruder?
He did. He chased after him, shouting into the dark, but there was no answer. As he was running, he tripped over a pile of stuff. It looked like someone had just dropped it there, including the small sword. It had the name of one of the Queen's closest aides etched on it.
So this wasn't some ghost or something. It was a real person who is in the palace stealing things.
Seemed that way. Cox called the palace guards right away, and they started searching all over. They were following these greasy footprints that led them through the palace grounds. It was like a wild goose chase.
It's like something straight out of a movie. Did they catch the guy?
They did, but it wasn't who they were expecting. They finally tackled him as he was trying to climb out a window, and guess what? It was a teenage boy covered head to toe in soot.
A teenager? What in the world was a teenager doing breaking into Buckingham Palace? And why covered in soot? Was this some kind of prank gone wrong?
This is where it gets really strange. The boy, his name was Edward Jones. He had stuff from the palace on him, stuff taken right from the Queen's bedroom, her portrait, some letters, and, this is the kicker, several pairs of her underwear.
Whoa, the Queen's underwear. That's more than just mischievous, even for a teenager. Did he say why he was there?
At first, Edward wouldn't talk, but later, when he was in front of the judge, he dropped a bomb. He claimed he'd been living inside Buckingham Palace for 11 months.
Living there. For almost a year. Come on, that's got to be a lie, right? Someone would have noticed a teenage boy hanging around.
That's what everyone thought, especially the palace officials. Edward's story seemed too crazy to be true. He said he would hide under furniture, behind curtains during the day, and then at night he'd roam the palace, wash his clothes, raid the kitchen, and, get this, eavesdrop on conversations.
So he was living out some kind of royal fantasy, just a little twisted, I guess. Was he after secrets or something?
Edward said he was gathering dirt on the royals, wanted to write a tell-all book, make a fortune, get out of poverty. You could say he was like an early version of a celebrity stalker. obsessed with the queen, her stuff, and the whole palace life.
It's a weird mix of ambition and a creepy fascination with the Queen. How did he pull this off? Was Buckingham Palace security really that bad?
That's what's so hard to believe. He probably wasn't there for 11 months, but palace officials did admit he could have been sneaking around for days without anyone noticing. They checked to see if he'd ever worked there, but there was nothing in the records.
So how did he get in? Was there like a secret passage or something?
Nope, the answer's way simpler than that. Edward said he just looked for open windows and unlocked doors.
No way. He just walked right in. That's both funny and kind of scary, you know?
It shows how different things were back then. No fancy cameras or alarms like today.
So what happened to Edward after they caught him? Did they lock him up in the Tower of London or something?
Surprisingly, no. Back then, eavesdropping wasn't a crime and trespassing was just a civil matter. Plus, he didn't actually get away with any stolen goods, so the judge couldn't really punish him for theft. The Queen was not happy, but they had to let Edward go.
Wait, they just let him walk free? After breaking into the Queen's bedroom and all that? You'd think they'd at least keep an eye on him.
They did, but it wasn't very organized. Edward's case was all over the news. Some people even saw him as a folk hero. Newspapers followed him everywhere, writing about him, even publishing songs and poems about him.
So this teenage stalker became like a Victorian-era celebrity. That's insane. Did all that attention stop him from trying to break into the palace again?
Not at all. Even with all the attention and extra police around the palace, Edward just couldn't stay away. He tried to break in 2 more times.
Seriously. He tried to get... This guy was obsessed. Did he actually get back inside? What did the Queen's people do about him? I can't believe he tried again after they caught him twice. What happened during those other break-ins? Was he still after that book idea?
Well, the second time, just 2 years after the first, was pretty creepy. Queen Victoria had just given birth.
Okay.
And somehow, Edward got into her dressing room while she was sleeping. They found him hiding under a sofa.
Wait, her dressing room, was that like part of a bedroom or something?
Yeah, you know, Victorian palaces, they could be confusing. Back then, a dressing room was basically like a smaller room attached to the bedroom, a place to, you know, get ready for the day.
Ah, okay.
It was still a very private space, especially for a new mom.
So he's in the Queen's private space, days after she's given birth. That's scary. Did he have any weapons? Did he try to hurt her or the baby?
Edward said he didn't mean any harm, said he was just gathering more info for his book. But this time, he hadn't stolen anything.
That makes it even weirder, right?
Totally. It's like, what was his motive?
I bet the palace was freaking out when they found him. After that first break-in, they were kind of easy on him, but this is totally different.
Absolutely. This time it was serious. The Queen's safety, the monarchy, it was all at risk.
So what did they do? Did they finally give him a real punishment?
This time they did. Instead of a public trial, they had the Queen's Privy Council deal with it.
Privy Council.
Yeah, basically it was a group of the Queen's top advisors, like a super exclusive inner circle, lots of power.
So they treated this like a national security thing, not just some kid trespassing.
Exactly. They sentenced him to 3-month hard labor.
Wow, okay.
And remember, trespassing wasn't even a crime back then, so that was a harsh sentence, especially since he said he wasn't trying to hurt anyone.
It sounds like they were trying to send a message, like, don't mess with the Queen.
I think you're right. They wanted to prevent this from ever happening again, even if it meant, you know, bending the rules a bit. But even prison couldn't stop Edward's obsession. 2 weeks after he got out, they caught him again.
No way, a third time. This guy was relentless.
Yeah.
What was he after this time? More underwear?
Nope, this time they found him in the kitchen, stuffing his face with potatoes.
Seriously.
Looks like his royal ambitions had come down to just being hungry.
It's kind of funny in a way, right? He starts by sneaking around, stealing underwear, thinking he'll write a book. And it all ends with him getting caught eating potatoes.
It is kind of ironic, but it also shows the sad side of his story. This was a troubled kid wanting a better life, but he just went about it all wrong.
So what happened to Edward in the end? Did he ever write that book? Did he ever have a normal life?
After that third arrest, he vanished. His family got letters saying he joined the Navy, was in Brazil, but they thought the government made him do it.
You mean like they forced him to join the Navy and sent him away to protect the Queen?
It does sound like something out of a movie, doesn't it? But back then, the monarchy had that kind of power. They could make someone disappear just to protect their image and keep the Queen safe.
Wow. So did he ever come back to England?
He did eventually, but he couldn't escape what he'd done. People still recognized him, still gossiped about him. He ended up going to Australia, using fake names, doing odd jobs, struggling with drinking.
It's a sad ending for someone who started out so bold. It seems like his obsession with the Queen, with a life he could never have, just ate him up.
It makes you think, even someone like Queen Victoria, with all her power and fame, she could still be a target. And it makes you wonder about what might have been. What if Edward had used all that energy and drive for something good?
That's a good question. Well, this has been fascinating. Thanks for sharing all this with us.
My pleasure. I always love diving into these historical mysteries.
And I'm sure our listeners do too. Thanks for joining us on this journey. We'll be back soon with more deep dives into the past. Until then, keep exploring those mysteries.